Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. This week I want to take a look at the debut album from Mammoth WVH. Now, Mammoth WVH's self-titled debut is actually the solo project of Wolfgang Van Halen, son of the legendary and much beloved guitar player Edward Van Halen, who unfortunately passed away about a year ago, actually not too long ago. Wolfgang Van Halen has openly stated in many interviews that he sees his last name as both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it's given him the opportunity and a venue to make music perhaps on a visibility level that the average musician probably wouldn't have access to. But on the other hand, he's had to live up to the expectations that Edward Van Halen's fan base had for him as his son. And I have a lot of respect for Wolfgang Van Halen for dealing with the situation as much as he has. I've talked a little bit in the past about how the progeny of very beloved musical stars have a lot of pressure on them, especially if they choose to go into the field and play music and do things that their fathers or their mothers had done before them. But the basis of the issue is many of Wolfgang Van Halen's fans are going to be Van Halen fans. And those are the people that are going to be curious about what he does. And they're going to lay the expectations on him set by his father. I am going to talk a little bit about Eddie in this video, not because I'm trying to compare what Wolfgang is doing to what Eddie did, but instead to show what Wolfgang is doing here on Mammoth WVH is actually the result of his relationship with his father. His father was a person that really related to people through music. We all loved him because of his musicality. And that was a relationship that he also cultivated with his son. Very early on, there's all this footage of Eddie Van Halen sitting down with his son, very young age, and playing piano and teaching him how to play drums and guitars and all this stuff. And of course, this culminated later on in the mid-aughts, whenever Van Halen got back together with David Lee Roth, of Wolfgang Van Halen actually going out on tour and taking Michael Anthony's place in Van Halen as the bass player for the group. So the easy thing for Wolfgang Van Halen to do would be to mine his name, his last name, and make music and make albums that were directly in the vein of Edward Van Halen and Van Halen's music. But he's generally, I think, not done that. As a matter of fact, I think that he has shied away from a lot of the things that were distinctive about Van Halen, while still staying in the hard rock vein, not betraying his background and the music that he loves, but instead creating something that is an outgrowth of that relationship that he had with his father. And he began working on this music in about 2015, and he shelved it during the time that his father really started to kind of fall ill and was taking care of him. And then he finished it after his father's had passed on. So this album was all written around the time that his father was really kind of gravely ill and had passed on afterwards. So a lot of the topics on this album are things that flowed out from the aftermath of his father's illness and eventual passing. And what he was able to do was compile all of his personal experience into something that was uniquely his. And I think as a result, it's one of the things that makes this album so distinctive and so wonderful. Now, his father didn't really teach him about just being a guitar player, but about instead being a whole musician. And due to that, Wolfgang Van Halen on this album plays everything. He plays all the drums, he does all the bass playing, does all the guitar playing, does all the vocals, and he recorded at his father's studio 5150. Now, clearly the music that he's playing is an outgrowth of the hard rock traditions that his father had set up before him. But stylistically, it's pretty radically different. There's a definite downplaying of like guitar, histrionics, and over-the-top showmanship. And so that's replaced by really meticulous craft in songwriting and outstanding musical performances that serve the song that he's trying to write. And I would definitely identify this more like post-grunge hard rock. In many ways, it has more in common with Foo Fighters and that style of music. I actually think, and I'm going to go out on a limb here when I say this, that Mammoth WVH is probably more consistent than the average Van Halen album. Van Halen 1 aside, and maybe 1984 aside, every other Van Halen album had some really great songs on it and had some songs that were a little bit maybe lower, lackluster, maybe not quite as refined as the other ones. Across the board, every single one of the songs on Mammoth WVH is an outstanding track. Although there's not as much variety as some other albums that I've listened to this year, there's definitely a constant thread that goes throughout the album musically. And in truth, if I was going to really relate it to Van Halen's catalog, I would almost put it more in alignment with the songwriting that Van Halen was doing during the Sammy Hagar era, which kind of makes sense because that's when Wolfgang Van Halen kind of came on the scene. He wasn't even alive whenever the David Lee Roth era is around, but he certainly was around when Edward was really working a lot more on his songwriting, playing more piano, and thinking less about being just a guitar virtuoso that he was, but also about being a songwriter. And Wolfgang's chops throughout this album, from instrument to instrument, are awesome. He's got a certain level of virtuosity on almost everything that he does in this album. But one of the things that really, I think, makes this album stand out of all things is the quality and thoughtfulness that he puts into his background vocals. And that's no mistake either. I mean, one of the things that was most distinctive about early Van Halen, about Van Halen period, was Michael Anthony's backup vocals. Well, he spent a good portion of his teens singing those vocals in context in front of people. So certainly his musicianship is not only, cultivated by Edward Van Halen's raising him and teaching him about music, but also the practice of being in Van Halen and being on stage and seeing how those vocals worked. And the combination of all those things was one of the things that really makes this album work so well.
Can't go back. Not everything is built to last. Give everything if I could ask. If it meant anything to you. Wait, why can't I move on? Hey, why'd you take so long?
I think that the heckling that Wolfgang Van Halen has kind of had to endure from people who really loved his father's music. I mean, the people who are giving him a hard time are the people that really loved Edward Van Halen. And these folks are giving him a hard time about his last name and getting out there and being a musician. But what else would they expect him to do? I mean, his father raised him to be an outstanding musician, to stick to his guns, to find a musical vision for himself, and see it through if that's what he wanted to do. And so there's really kind of no other way that Wolfgang Van Halen can be in the world other than to play music and express himself musically. And I think it's particularly fitting that this album is kind of gathered around his father's passing, and the medium that Wolfgang Van Halen is using to get this point across is music. He's speaking the language that his father taught him, almost directly to his father in some cases. I mean, the lead track from this album, The Distance, is an ode to his father, kind of from beyond, telling his father that, even though this distance between us, I'll be okay and you'll be okay. He's telling his father from the ether, from somewhere else, after leaving this rock that he's on, that it will be okay. He'll be okay. No matter where you are, I'm going to be close to you. And using the medium of music to say this to his father, to almost at some point in the song, like scream it out to the heavens. I think it's extremely moving and actually really a vulnerable spot for Wolfgang to be in, to use as a place to write music from. Now, here's the clever thing about it. If you don't know that about this song, it could be talking about anybody who experiences any distance, a breakup or a person moving away. But ultimately, this song, like many of the songs in this album, have this underpinning of Wolfgang paying tribute to his relationship with his father through music, but without ever doing it in a super obvious way. But if you know to listen for it, it's there throughout the entire album. And so not only do I have respect for Wolfgang Van Halen for writing such a great album and really sticking to his guns and seeing a vision of what he could do musically through to this end point, I also have a lot of respect for him putting it out there and making himself vulnerable and talking about these inner feelings that he had. He's very vocal on Twitter about his relationship with his father and how close they were. And on the other hand, Edward Van Halen was no angel. He had his own problems. He had his own things that he walked through. It couldn't have always been easy to have him as a father. But I think that there's no question that Edward Van Halen loved Wolfgang very, very much. And this album is the result of that love, not just because of the lyrics of the songs and the way that he pays that kind of tribute to him, but the musical concept that Wolfgang Van Halen developed due to his father's tutelage and his love for him is the thing I think that really makes this album shine so well. It's a wonderful tribute to his father, but also a tribute to his own talent and the way that his talent had been nurtured by Edward Van Halen. So I love this album a whole lot. It's actually one that has gotten a lot more mileage. It's super, super catchy. If you listen to this album, you'll be humming the tracks, without even meaning to all the time. There's riffs and there's licks and there's hooks all over. And they're all super confident and they're all extremely well executed and extremely thoughtfully put together. And we have the entire Van Halen family really to thank for that happening. And I gotta say that if people are concerned about the future of rock and roll, because sooner or later, Dave Grohl is gonna stop carrying the torch for rock and roll. I believe it's in great, great hands with Wolfgang. Keep an eye on this guy. And I really hope that he stays true to his promise to spend his days in 5150 paying tribute to his dad, making great music. So that's all I got to say about this album for now. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe and share it out with your friends. Also follow me over on Spotify. I'll be putting more tracks up from Mammoth WVH. And the eliminations are coming to a close very soon, so keep your eyes open for those. And until you see you next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.